were the first Americans? Where did they come from? In this movie we are going to talk about one of the greatest journeys that humans have made. This is the story of the first Americans.
Do you know the lives of the early Americans was much harder than it is now? Back then, humans had to make their own clothes, tools, and weapons by hand from things they found in their environment.
During the Wisconsin Ice Age, which began around 70,000 years ago, there was a piece of land connecting Siberia and Alaska, which was called Beringia.
Beringia was a land bridge that connected Siberia and Alaska. During this ice age, 97% of Canada was covered with ice.
In order to understand how Beringia was formed, you must first understand the water cycle. The water cycle is a never-ending cycle in which water moves around the planet Earth from the ocean to clouds and back to the ocean again. The amount of water on planet Earth has been the same for millions of years. The water is recycled through the water cycle.
One stage in the water cycle is evaporation. This happens when water vapor starts to rise because the heat of the sun, which turns water into gas and rises into the sky.
The next stage after evaporation is condensation. Condensation is when the gas from evaporation forms a cloud. Then more water vapor collects in the cloud, which forms water droplets. The next stage after condensation is precipitation. Precipitation is when water vapors in a cloud get so heavy that the water droplets fall. So basically, precipitation is rain, snow, or hail.
The next stage after precipitation is collection. Collection is when the raindrops flow into streams and rivers, and those streams and rivers flow into seas and oceans, and evaporation begins again.
And that's the water cycle!
Beringia was formed because the water cycle stopped and the sea level dropped. The water cycle continued normally, but the temperature dropped, so the water froze and stayed on land instead of flowing back to the ocean. Much of the ocean's water evaporated but didn't flow back to the ocean, so the sea level dropped. These large frozen areas were known as glaciers. The dry land that used to be the bottom of the ocean is Beringia.
Around 20,000 years ago, the Earth's temperature began to rise. This caused the Ice Age glaciers to begin to melt. The water from the melting glaciers flowed back into the seas, causing the ocean's water levels to rise. Eventually, the land area known as Beringia flooded and returned to the bottom of the ocean.
This process took over 10,000 years. Many early American tribes were living in Beringia during this term. As Beringia slowly flooded, they had to decide whether to continue traveling east into North America or return to Siberia. Before Beringia, their home was completely underwater. Those who decided to continue east were the first Americans.
Some anthropologists think that the first Americans crossed Beringia because they were following herds of animals that were also crossing Beringia. They traveled on foot, moving very slowly. This crossing took hundreds or thousands of years. Other anthropologists believe that the early Americans migrated from Siberia to Alaska by boat following the shoreline. They would have eaten mostly fish and camped along the shore, but no one knows for sure.
During the last ice age, which in North America is called the Wisconsin Ice Age, there were many different animals than there are in North America today. Some of these animals were the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed tiger, the giant ground sloth, the mastodon, giant beavers, short-faced bear, the American lion, and the short horses. All of these animals are now extinct. When an animal or plant comes extinct, that means they no longer exist on the planet. They are all dead.
The first North Americans were people who traveled across Beringia in North America. This is a group of hunters and gatherers. They are at their camp in Beringia resting, making weapons, sewing clothes, and keeping warm by the fire. Fire was one of the greatest discoveries the early Americans made. Fire was important to help them keep warm in the cold Ice Age environment and to cook their meat in order to kill germs and bacteria that would live on the raw meat.